Welp, here we are again. Another Overwatch League tournament winner in the history books. While definitely not the most exciting tournament we've had, it definitely had its fair share of great moments, and having that live Korean crowd made it all the better. Let's take a look at how we crowned the 22nd tournament winner in League history. Florida versus the Spark. You know, Florida, I really thought you were turning the corner after what we saw in the knockouts. I thought you finally got the nerves out of your system. And with a match with the Spark, you in theory had the advantage thanks to composition choice. This was your game for the taking. But when push came to shove, the guys playing from home got the better of you. The Spark's dives were a lot more coordinated, constantly diving onto the hacked squishies, and going way faster than Florida were ready for. I mean, damn. Shy had his best Sombra performance of the season, while Merritt perhaps had the worst match of his entire career. This might have been the biggest Sombra gap we have ever seen. The stat differential in this one was absurd, and credit also has to go where it's due to Monk in this one, as his Ana was an absolute game changer. The Sparks backline has been a weakness of them for a long time, so when somebody outside of like Gushue or Leave or Shy is killing you, the Spark are pretty tough to crack, and I think Florida found that out the hard way. It's sad too, because even with all this in mind, Florida still had a chance to win this, but costly mistakes ranging from terrible C9s like this likely costed them the series. They came in maybe a little overconfident, and they paid for it. Boston versus Houston. Ah yes, the Boston Uprising playing arguably at the highest level we have ever seen them at. Surely things won't go wrong in a tournament game, right? Surely not. Who am I kidding? Boston got punched in the freaking mouth. The plan was very simple. Do not let Birdring play this video game. Happy and Pelican hounded this guy the entire set, constantly finding his translocators and completely taking him out of the equation. The Boston DPS did not know what they were in for. Pelican and Happy absolutely demolished them, and it's the way in which it happened that really stands out. It's one thing for Pelican to outplay Decay in a Tracer battle, that's pretty reasonable I'd say, but it's a completely different animal when Happy is outplaying both Decay and Birdring in the same series. When you fail to adapt and the Houston DPS are on like that, there's really not much you can do. My only question is, where was Twilight? You know, the guy that helped you make Korea in the first place? It was one of the many times throughout this entire week, if we're being honest, where Boston made absolutely no sense, and it astounds me. Anyway, Atlanta versus the Spark. They might have gotten one earlier in the day, but rest assured, Rain put them way back in their place. If you thought this was going to be like last year, then you were sadly mistaken. There's not much to say about this one. The Rain were so much better, to the point where sometimes they were actually trolling. I'm looking at you, Lip. Those whiffed EMPs were atrocious, and against a serious contender, it could have been a costly mistake. But against the Spark, it's really no worries. Monk came way back down to earth in this one, and Lip was pretty much lapping Shy in EMP charge. It was an all-around team diff, and anytime the Spark got anything going, they were shut down immediately. The Spark support line got thoroughly outplayed. Fielder and Chio looked like men possessed out there. The Spark were at the mercy of their godlike consistency and eye-opening playmaking. There's really not much else to say aside from that though. All the highlights basically belong to the Rain. Houston versus Infernal. You know, from a narrative perspective, this felt exciting. And at the start, it looked like we might actually be in for a solid series. Infernal picked Lijiang Tower and broke out the Sim Rush comms, something that Houston don't have that much practice on, mind you, and it kinda looked like it was working at first. Skewed and Mag were firing on all cylinders, and it seemed like there was a real chance they were gonna set the tone early on. But unfortunately, on both rounds that they lost back-to-back, they choked away big-time percentage leads, as Shu and Violet stepped up majorly whenever it mattered, and that kind of set the tone for the rest of what we'd see in that series. Every moment from there on out was Houston's game to win, basically. And while not all his fault, I'd say that Shu certainly got the better of his former teammate Skewed. Shu dominated that Ana battle, showing that little bro maybe has something left to learn still. And unfortunately for Skewed, his teammates weren't exactly doing him any favors. He needed an ultra good performance out of his DPS, and he didn't get much of anything. MN3 was hella quiet, and the whole team was generally in disarray. perhaps the lights were a little too bright for the new kids out of Seoul. Speaking of Seoul, they'd play straight away, right again, the beginning of the next day against the Mayhem, and if I'm being honest with you, this was full of suffering on both sides. The only real winners in this scenario are the token farmers, because damn, this game was hard to watch and it went the distance. Close as that scoreline was, this was basically a battle of who wanted to throw this game more. The epic battle of Chorong dying first every single fight versus the tragic MN3 Sombra. The number of times that Seoul choked when given golden opportunities is borderline laughable. I mean, really, we're setting the bar extremely low. How in the hell do you get to Point C of Blizzard World, of all places, with a 5-minute time bank and fail to complete this map? How? How do you make that happen? There is absolutely no universe where that should ever go down. Terrible dives, terrible EMPs, terrible everything, really. You just can't make it up. And the worst part about it is they actually started to play so much better after this colossal choke. Their second half was relatively clean, and if they had even just one clutch bone in their body, they could have easily have won this series. I mean, they so easily could have won Lijiang or Blizzard Worlds, and even through all of that, there was still a golden chance to win this series. They had all the momentum on their side, winning 2 maps in a row, and even the first round on Ilios. And yet, the Philly Spirit still found a way to rear its ugly head. 200% to 0 the rest of the way through? And a C9 on the final fight? Really? It's just so sad to think about, because if they could actually close, this would have been over in like 4 maps. It is amazing that they ended up blowing such a big opportunity like this. I cannot stress enough how poorly the Infernal played whenever it mattered. Their dive coordination and their Sombra play was actually tragic. Oh, and shout out to Checkmate, by the way, to give some credit to Florida. This dude got player of the match while playing injured. His arm and his hand both got cut up pretty decently, and it was probably very uncomfortable to play on, and the wound even reopened mid-game. But you know what he said before this match happened to Swing Chip? I can still play tomorrow. If anything, I'll play even better now. This dude's hand was literally shaking from the pain, and that is the kind of performance he puts up. That is Giga Chad behavior, ladies and gentlemen. Checkmate, my friend, you are a legend. Boston versus the Spark. So the APAC Pride went into shambles pretty quick. The more composed veteran roster did not crack under the pressure like the Mayhem did one day prior. This game boiled down to a few key factors. 1. Boston's playmakers showed up big time. Decay was great. But more importantly, Twilight was completely locked in. Twilight's Ana performance is the type of play that makes the game completely unplayable for the other team, and it is easily one of the greatest individual Ana performances I have ever seen. He hit every single important cooldown. Leave and Shy were getting bullied. They couldn't even get near this guy without getting slapped. They were genuinely afraid. Which gets me into point number 2. Spark DPS denial. If the Spark DPS can't carry, then they stand very little chance. Leave in particular was the main target right from map 1, as he was dying a lot. It was honestly the least useful I have seen him be probably in years. Boston could do whatever they wanted to, in perhaps one of their most impressive wins to date. And unfortunately for APAC fans, your region's run ended right here. Houston versus Atlanta, winners finals. The fact that this wasn't even the last game of the tournament is crazy, because damn did it feel like one. A few of the maps were not super high scoring per se, but don't let those numbers deceive you. Each and every map was tight. And it's when we have these types of stalemates that it's usually up to some of the individual pop-offs to decide it. Look at Blizzard World, for example. Atlanta Reign got full held on this map, and a lot of it comes down to when Happy managed to stick Chio, who accidentally bashed into Fielder. That set up the win condition they needed to full hold. It was a rare error from the backline that let Houston take this map. On the other side of it, we had a full hold and a near fuller hold on Rialto. Atlanta did their job on the defense, standing strong, but then they struggled to finish on their attack for a while, and if it weren't for the plays of Stalker on both sides of the map really, they probably lose this map and the series, as he is pretty much the sole reason why they won the 3 biggest fights of Rialto. He had so many big kills and crazy pulse bombs at the perfect moment. And just to make the series even spicier, as we sometimes see with close games, big-time mistakes can happen and unforced errors can kind of change the outcome of a series, as Houston ended up coming back down and push down 50 meters with about 3 minutes left to go. And what it really came down to was both teams trying their best to lose it. It starts off with Pelican whiffing an EMP that could have been their win condition, but then Atlanta threw just as hard with a questionable transcendence, allowing for the Houston Outlaws to finish the map and send it to a map 5 where they unfortunately would run out of gas. As hard as they tried, Stalker and the Rain backline would not falter. Houston simply got outplayed by their superior's map pick. They came up short in this one, but I think ultimately they showed that it's possible for them to defeat Atlanta Reign, in that there's definitely some mutual respect between these two rosters. And honestly, if it weren't for Stalker having literally the game of his life, this would have went a lot differently, as this was probably one of the best Tracer performances I have seen in years. If there was ever any doubts that he wasn't a top player and potentially the #1 Tracer in the league, it's time to let that go. Also, Dynasty fans, you're probably cringing in your seats right now. Boston versus Florida. Boston? Are you okay? What on earth happened? You literally just played a great game a few hours prior to this one. How do you go from that to this? I'm not sure if Boston have bad results against the Mayhem and Scrims, or if they ran out of gas, but they looked terrified. It was a lifeless performance. They were overthinking way too hard. That Kings Row pick was completely out of left field. And the worst part about it was, their secret weapon on that map was a Decay Genji. Needless to say, that didn't go too hot for them. Genji in this economy just ain't gonna cut it. And after that, Boston were totally checked out. There should never be a world where you're playing Orisa with Lee Jae-gon on BAP and Moira. Boston played with so much unneeded desperation. They lost the mental battle, and if you're losing it as early as they did, the game's already over. Mayhem were practically better in every facet. Someone pummeled those kids into the dirt to secure a well-deserved top 3 in this tournament. Florida versus Houston. If you're Houston, this was supposed to be your warm-up game, not one that really made you sweat like how it did. This was going to be your walk in the park that got you loose for Reign. It's supposed to be the thing that shows that you're in a new tier all by yourself. But instead, Florida Mayhem really gave them hell, as 3 out of 4 maps in this series were incredibly close. There's a world where Houston actually lose this. Mayhem were one fight away from taking both Peninsula and Push. They gave Houston everything they had. Houston expected to walk in here and get it over with quickly, but they had other plans for these guys. In typical Mayhem fashion, they just have to find ways to remind you of their existence at probably the worst possible time. And I have to give a lot of credit to my main man Checkmate once again, as he was totally locked in. It might have come in a losing effort, but the man's Tracer and May were absolutely on point. It's just that in the end, Houston proved to be the more clutch team by winning the map-defining fights. Florida kept it a lot closer than people expected though, and I think because of that, it is safe to say that their top 3 was very well deserved. Houston versus Atlanta, Grand Finals. Would we get the rematch of the century, and possibly a playoff Grand Finals preview? Well, not this time. Atlanta kept things totally under control. This was a completely different series compared to the previous day, and it is a performance like this one that goes to show you exactly why they're the best, and why they could end up being the best ever. They finally got challenged the other day. They finally looked human, like it was actually possible to beat them. But then they one-upped the Houston Outlaws completely by elevating themselves even higher while also cracking down on the major mistakes. Houston might have proved they have what it takes to topple the Reign, but it doesn't mean they can reach that level consistently. Reign have been the best team in the league for a reason, and they proved it with a genuine masterclass. Ilios maybe gave us some false hope at the start. That map was extremely close, and Houston damn near took it, and the tone perhaps could have been different for the rest of this series had the Outlaws actually finished the job. But instead, the exact opposite effect occurred. It set an ongoing theme for the Atlanta Reign, literally being better in every single category for the rest of this series. This was by no means a this guy or that guy needed to do more thing. This was a total team diff. Houston lost every single positional battle and the mental battle, and I think a lot of the Atlanta players simply stepped up to a new level. Houston actually could not compete in the dive mirror. They were way too slow, and while their dives were proven unsuccessful, Donghak, Lip, and Stalker were annihilating the Outlaws backline. And that's not even where the troubles end, as every single player on the Houston Outlaws had their struggles. Fearless was getting absolutely no value with his primals, and was antied and hacked constantly. The Houston DPS were relatively quiet in this one, and then Shu and Violet were dying far too often by overcommitting and being in the wrong position. And on top of that, the Outlaws as a whole made a lot of unforced errors. Lots of panic and desperation ults were getting thrown out and losing situations throughout this entire set that maybe could have costed them some fights. But honestly, I think it's pretty obvious that one factor stands above the rest as to why Houston got rolled as hard as they did. The big reason that Houston were getting gapped was that failure to pressure Atlanta's backline. Every single coordinated dive and pressure attempt failed miserably. Fielder and Chio were actually unkillable. It's like they had a sixth sense for knowing when the other was about to die. They played together literally perfectly every single time. It might have been the most dominant backline showing we have ever seen in the history of Overwatch. And ultimately, with how important backline presence has proven to be this year, something like this is gonna be game defining. Failure to kill that backline set the tone for this whole series. Fielder could literally do anything he wanted from start to finish, and credit goes where it's due to him for having such an intelligent game and clutching up as he always seems to do during the big matches in his career. Fielder was out of this world, and he is the biggest reason that Atlanta blew this so wide open. His Bionade and Sleep Dart connections were almost surgical. The accuracy and the timing were immaculate. And perhaps the most wild thing of all is the fact that he was hitting these cooldowns from such a long distance. Fielder played it safe, really trying his best to stretch out those Outlaws' resources, and he was still hitting all of his shots. It's honestly unfair when you're locked in like this. Fielder gets the well-deserved Finals MVP for his efforts. He completely took over this game. His awareness and ability to set up plays once again reigned supreme. Atlanta Reign have cruised their way to their first ever first place finish. A major congrats goes to the Atlanta Reign for never being satisfied. They've been on the top for a while now, and sometimes that can make you go soft, but they always have a hunger to do more, and that's what's so amazing about them. You could tell that it meant a lot for these players, and I'm extremely happy for both Gator and Hawk, who have been with this organization since the very beginning. And it's dominance like this that does a lot from a legacy perspective. It puts the Atlanta Reign on track to maybe have one of the best teams ever, and it does a lot when it comes to the GOAT conversation for Lip and for Fielder individually, but also for Chio and Fielder as a backline. Regardless, this kind of win makes one thing painfully obvious. The Reign are the best team in the world, and the only team that even comes close is the Outlaws. As for now, we take a little break in the action to let these guys rest up. The mid-season madness was the perfect ending to the first half of 2023. The games were great, and the live Korean crowd was out of this world. It really brought me back to the Apex days, even if it was just for a couple of days. Just an unbeatable experience that I'm glad so many new school fans finally got the pleasure of experiencing. This will be a tournament that we can never forget. Let's just hope that the next one can be just as good. Thanks for watching.